friends. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, I bring to you the tale of the Cemetery Walking Tour by Philip Woolley. It was only a dream, but 4 dreams, 4 nights in a row, was more than I can handle. Summer was fun and carefree, but the air turned chilly, and a new school year had begun. The leaves began to turn vivid colors and covered the landscape with hues of yellow, red, and orange. Autumn was filled with many seasonal activities. Escaping the perils of the corn maze, pumpkin picking, hay rides, and the taste of hot apple cider at the Queen's Farm Museum. One activity I looked forward to was the upcoming Halloween walking tour at Maple Grove Cemetery, which was called The Strange, the Unusual, and a touch of the paranormal. It was then that my dreams began. The first dream left me drenched in sweat. In it, I found myself being chased down a dark alley. In the distance, I saw a dark, shadowy figure. Then I heard heavy footsteps coming closer. A growling, sinister voice pierced my ears and cried, "Give it to us. Give us your brain." When I awoke, it was morning, and the warmth of the sun touched my face. It made me laugh. It was only a dream. The following night, my next dream was not frightening at all. It was rather boring and mundane. I remember that I was making my own bed, covering the mattress with the fitted sheet that wrapped snugly around its rectangular form. The flat sheet came next, then the comforter, and finally, the pillows. My bed looked so soft and inviting. I could feel my body floating and falling into it, yearning for a deep sleep. A silly dream, I thought. The third night came with the third dream. And this dream left me shivering and shaking in my bed. I dreamt I was trapped in a small dark place, barely able to turn around. I cried out, "I'm here! I'm here! Help me! Let me out!" I could hear voices above me, but no one heard my cries. I awoke in panic. By the 4th night, I was a little afraid to go to sleep, but I could not stop myself from a deep slumber. Suddenly, I was dreaming again and found myself on a very long line of silent people. At the head of the line was a door, but beyond it, a darkness that seemed very threatening and frightening. I waited as the line moved slowly forward. Finally, reaching the head of the line and staring into the void of darkness, I saw nothing. I heard a voice. Room for one more. I shook and awoke from that dream with my heart racing in my chest. What did it all mean? But the fourth was the last. There were no more dreams to follow, and I slept very soundly and quickly forgot about my dreams. What nonsense. What nonsense. I was excited to get into an autumn spirit and look forward to the upcoming costume parties and the bags of candies to be collected from trick-or-treating. The day of the cemetery tour finally arrived. The old Victorian cemetery was beautiful, with rolling green hills and stately trees, but looked rather strange in the dark. A large crowd gathered, and we were greeted by a tour guide who started to tell us many unusual and strange stories as we visited one site after another. We were deep in the heart of the cemetery when we started the tour. The first was the unmarked grave of Count Johannes, a Shakespearean actor famous for his wisdom and quick wit. He died in 1880, and shortly thereafter a rumor spread that a reward of $500 worth of gold pieces was offered to anyone who could steal his head, so scientists could examine his brain. Indeed, the guide explained that this was a true story and read from old newspaper articles. A group of men were discovered in the cemetery trying to dig up the body of the old count. They were frightened, but were frightened away. I felt a chill in my heart because it made me think of my first dream and that sinister voice that screamed, "Give us your brain." But I laughed it off. The next site offered a story of a grave digger under the employment of the cemetery. In 1890, he became ill, and just before dying, told the cemetery superintendent he had already dug his own grave. What the guide said next made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He made his own bed for his eternal rest. It reminded me of my second dream and how I too made my own bed. I kept telling myself this was all a silly joke. Hesitantly, I walked with the group to other sites, barely paying any attention, hoping that the tour might end soon. It had grown darker, but suddenly the heavy clouds parted, and a ray of moonlight hit upon a beautiful white statue of an angel, and it seemed to glow in the dark. The guide began telling us the meaning of the word taphophobia. Taphophobia. The fear of being buried alive. A trickle of sweat rolled down the side of my face. He explained that in 1887, some people feared a young girl was buried alive at this grave. That was just like my third dream. I too was in a dark space and was screaming for help, but no one could hear me. I was trapped in my own coffin. I was already as pale as a ghost when the tour guide announced that the tour had come to its conclusion. I was so relieved and could not wait to leave. But what about my last dream? The other sites we had visited did not have any connection to my last dream. Had I somehow escaped? I kept telling myself it was just a coincidence. There was nothing to fear, but I wanted to get out. In a few minutes, I would be exiting the gate. The cemetery tour guide bid us a safe return home and reminded us about an upcoming event. A murder mystery performance. At the start of the tour, we had all filled out a card, and now one lucky person's card was going to be picked and win a free ticket to attend the murder mystery. He pulled a card from a box and called the name. My mind was so distracted. All I wanted to do was get out. I was not paying attention, but the excitement of my family made me realize it was my name being called out. I had won! The guide came towards me, congratulated me, and handed me the prize ticket. My blood froze as I glanced upon the ticket placed in my hand. It read, Cemetery Murder Mystery. The title of the play, Room for One More?
Greetings, friends. My name is Sharyar Hussain with the Friends of Maple Grove. The short story The Walking Tour was written by 12-year-old Philip Woolley. The dream sequences were based on century-old newspaper articles that were found in the Friends of Maple Grove Cemetery archives. Maple Grove Cemetery was founded in 1875 and has a rich history generated by the human stories from over 117,000 people buried here. Referred to as a haven of peace and beauty within a park-like setting, Maple Grove Cemetery is a gracious, historic 65-acre rural cemetery. It is an active, non-sectarian, progressive cemetery with an enduring reputation for providing caring, sensitive services and thoughtful options to honor loved ones. As a rural cemetery, the landscape includes gentle rolling hills, several gardens, a lake, and a magnificent collection of trees, shrubbery, and flowers that make it a beautiful kaleidoscope throughout the four seasons. Since 1875, Maple Grove continues to serve as an integral part of evolving Queens communities, not only as a final resting place for loved ones, but also as a place to celebrate and honor lives past and be a cultural resource for families and visitors. It has also become a recognizable community culture center where the Friends of Maple Grove, a nonprofit membership organization whose mission is to increase public awareness of Maple Grove's historical, horticultural, and cultural resources, host events for the public appropriate for all ages. In the short story, The Walking Tour, the young author recounts in his first dream hearing heavy footsteps coming closer, followed by a growling, sinister voice crying out, "Give it to us! Give us your brain!" It refers to a body-snatching incident that happened at Maple Grove in 1880 involving Count Johannes, a Shakespearean actor, writer, lecturer, lawyer, and bon vivant of New York City. Admirers clamored to hear his every word. He was considered to be an expert in all aspects of the arts, acting, diplomacy, and legal matters, and often quoted in the local tabloids. The Count had a most humble birth, born in 1810 in the city of London, England, with the birth name of George Jones. He was drawn to the theater early in his life after coming to America at the age of 7 and embarked upon this profession with vigor and vitality. He would light up the stage and dazzle the audience with his acting skills, reaching great heights of fame playing the role of Hamlet before packed houses. He even performed before the Emperor Napoleon III and his family. It is stated that at the time his salary would reach a staggering $1,500 a performance. The Count had no official degree but practiced as a lawyer, often using many unconventional tactics to win cases, quoting Shakespeare and other literary pieces to get his point across. He took an oath to protect women and gave his services as a lawyer to widows and orphans without charge. In 1847, he was knighted by a Prussian ambassador, and from then on became known as Count Johannes, Knight of the Golden Spur and Count Palatine. The Count made a dashing figure through the streets of New York City, wearing a bejeweled pendant upon a black scarf and his flowing black cape. In later years, he met a young lady by the name of Lydia Avania Fairbanks and tutored her for the stage and made her his star pupil. In 1871, the Count asked Lydia to perform the role of Juliet to his Romeo, even though he was 61 years old at the time. The crowds were not at all kind to their performance, and a near riot broke out. During the famous balcony scene, someone cried out, "Oh, George!" Another bellowed, "Avania, do give George a kiss!" And finally, the stage was littered with cabbage heads. The Count remained completely unfazed. He walked to the center of the footlights, picked up one of the cabbage heads, and addressing the audience in a low, tragic voice, he cried out, "Oh, cabbage heads, gaze upon your brothers," and turned the cabbage to face the audience. The theater erupted into laughter and applause. In the Count's declining years, he lived in poverty in a small room in New York City and died on January 1st, 1880 without a dollar to his name. Lydia watched over him in the end and arranged for a funeral at the little church around the corner, and many friends and admirers helped to pay for the cost of the funeral and burial. A grave was secured at Maple Grove, and on January 5th, 1880, his body was brought here. The lid of the coffin was opened, and Lydia removed a plain gold ring from her finger and placed it on the little finger of his left hand. It was the wedding ring of the Count's mother. They watched as the coffin was lowered into the grave, receiving the earthly remains of this great and most distinguished gentleman. They stayed until the last shovelful of sod was placed on the grave and departed, a small wooden cross marking his grave. According to the Maple Grove Internment Book, George Jones, Count Johannes, born in England, died on January 1st and was buried on January 5th, 1880 in the Maple section, lot 392, grave 3. It stated he died from a tumor of the abdomen. He was 70 years old. The Maple Grove Cemetery was informed that same evening that some medical men had offered a sum of $500 for the head and brains of the Count, hoping to unlock the secrets of his genius. The superintendent became alarmed, recalling that a number of strange fellows had stopped by his office earlier in the day, inquiring about the location of his grave. He hired 2 gravediggers and gave them a shotgun and a 6-shooter. He armed himself with a loaded double-barrel Winchester rifle. The superintendent positioned himself near the grave with a lantern, and he stationed one of the gravediggers at the Riker's vault and the other at the receiving tomb further down the path. They waited late into the night. It was a bitterly cold night, and by 2 a.m. the superintendent sought some relief by going to his office close by and instructed his men to shoot at anyone coming near the grave. He was startled when the gravediggers came to the door and reported that they had seen 3 lanterns moving through the woods. Several men appeared carrying bundles on their shoulders. The gravediggers became frightened and ran to get him. He grabbed his rifle and hurried to the grave, but found no one there, only fresh footprints all around the Count's grave. It caused a stir in the entire city, and after several more sleepless nights, the grave robbers had given up hope to steal the Count's head and brain. In the second dream, the author writes that his dream was rather mundane and it was not scary at all. He remembers making his own bed, covering the mattress with a fitted sheet that wrapped snugly around its rectangular form. It actually refers to a bizarre and unusual story about a gravedigger working at Maple Grove Cemetery, who actually digs his own grave. On September 30th, 1890, the Long Island Democrat published an article that Froul Eklund, a Frenchman aged 52 years, at one time in the employ of Dr. Wood as a stableman, but who has been engaged as a gravedigger and general assistant in the Maple Grove Cemetery, dug a grave in one of the rear plots last Thursday unbeknown to his employer. It was not discovered until Saturday morning, and not until after Eklund had been found sick with fever in his bed in the barn. He died on Saturday night, but just before he took his last breath, told of the grave which he opened for the receptacle of his own body, which was buried yesterday as desired. The Maple Grove Internment Book pinpoints the exact date of gravedigger Eklund's burial, September 29, 1890, having died of pneumonia the day before at the age of 52, but gives his nationality as Swedish and not French as reported in the newspaper article. He was buried in the south border section, Lot 4, Grave 11. Maple Grove Cemetery described him as one of their own workers, and the cemetery provided the grave for his burial. The comparison has the young author dreaming about preparing his bed while Eklund was preparing a grave for his final resting place. In the third dream, the young author is trapped, is shivering and shaking in a confined space and cries out, "I'm here! Help me! Let me out!" He can hear voices above him, but no one hears his cries. This refers to an 1887 newspaper article about the possibility of a young girl buried alive at Maple Grove. The term tapophobia refers to the fear of being buried alive. During the Victorian era, this phobia reached a crescendo. Master storyteller Edgar Allan Poe exploited these human fears in his stories, and the fear of being buried alive was no exception. His short story Premature Burial was first published in 1844. On November 21st, 1887, this newspaper article was front-page news. Was she buried alive? It begins with a Mrs. Catherine Wicks who runs to a police station asking for a doctor. She explains that 8-year-old Emma Brown, who lived at 196 Green Street, had died 2 days earlier. Emma, who suffered from sciatic rheumatism, was seen by Dr. Smith the week before. Days later, Emma, according to the articles, called out after a sound sleep, "Murder!" several times. Her body gave a convulsive movement and she fell back, apparently dead. Assistants from Undertaker Merritt were summoned, and they came to the home and dressed Emma for burial. On the following day, she was placed in a coffin. Mrs. Wicks and a young 9-year-old playmate were in the room with the body. Suddenly, the little boy said he heard a noise come from the coffin. Mrs. Wicks listened intently and heard a rattling noise coming from Emma's throat. She placed a mirror near Emma's mouth, and a white surface appeared in the mirror. Emma's mother sent Mrs. Wicks to find a doctor, but none would come and refused to believe her story. Meanwhile, the undertaker's assistants came and said that Emma was dead. No doctor has seen Emma since Dr. Smith's last visit. He simply gave a certificate of death, as is customary in such cases when called upon by a member of the family. Emma was buried at Maple Grove Cemetery. Mrs. Brown told neighbors that she could not afford to keep Emma longer or pay to have the doctors to come examine her. She said she would have to take the word of the undertakers who carried little Emma away. The article ends with this quote: "The strange story spread through the neighborhood and excited considerable comment. It was said by one neighbor that there was talk of having the coffin opened today to see where there had been any evidence of life after the burial." According to the Maple Grove Internment Book, Emma Brown from 196 Green Street died on November 18, 1887, and was buried on November 20, 1887, in the Summit section, Lot 300, Grave 81, and was 7 years, 2 months old, and died from heart disease. In the fourth and final dream, the young author finds himself on a very long line of silent people. At the head of the line was a door, but beyond it a darkness that seems very threatening and frightening. He waited as it moved slowly forward. Finally, reaching the head of the line and staring into the void of darkness, he saw nothing. He heard a voice. "Room for one more?" This final dream makes reference to the annual production of Maple Grove's Murder Mystery Dinner Theater, which had its first production in 2013. Maple Grove is the only cemetery in the world that holds such an event of this kind. The staff of the Friends of Maple Grove writes their own scripts and incorporates some of the notable people buried at the cemetery into the fictional storyline. It is a unique way that they bring history alive, a motto that they often use. The first production of the Friends murder mystery was entitled Room for One More. This short story in production, The Walking Tour, is just another unique way for the Friends of Maple Grove to help tell the stories of the over 117,000 people cared for at Maple Grove Cemetery. Thank you, and do join us again.
In sleep he sang to me, in dreams he came. That voice which calls to me and speaks my name. And do I dream again? For now I find the phantom of the opera is there inside my mind.
Sing once again with me a strange duet. My power over you.
This short story in production, The Walking Store.
That's it.
I'm keeping that one.
The blooper. That's the blooper. We gotta make